I had an interest in Gibson mandolins in the 60s, and I was running an ad in the Staten Island Advance saying wanted to buy guitars, mandolins. And I noticed there was another person running an ad the weeks that I didn't run an ad. They wanted guitars, mandolins, and banjos. And that was Stanley M.J. And at a certain point in time, Stanley and I got to meet each other because Stanley had a production company called J Sound Productions, and he was recording several different artists, including at that time Linda and Barry, and Stanley really had the ability to know a lot of people in New York and be in that music community, and he was also in the music community on Staten Island. I went to visit a relative in New Jersey, and there was an ad in the paper. Somebody was selling a collection of banjos. And so I called the person and I found out where they were, and I said, I'd like to come back, but I'd like to come back with somebody that knows more about banjos than I do. And I called Stan, and at first he was a little like, what do you want? And I said, well, you know more about banjos than me, and I found a place in New Jersey where a gentleman has a house, and he says, full of banjos. And if you'd like, we'll go there together and we'll do a partnership on this, and if we can buy something and make it together, we do it. So Stanley agreed, and we went to New Jersey, and Stanley said most of it he wasn't interested in, but we bought 2 bags of banjo parts and an inexpensive Gibson mandolin, and we had them reassembled by a friend who could assemble banjos on Staten Island, a gentleman named Wayne Norman, who originally worked with us to help us put banjos into a working order, putting heads on them, the newer plastic heads, and we wound up selling that 2 banjos and mandolins for several $1,000s, and then we decided to reinvest. So Stanley said, I know where there's some other goods. I said, I know where there's a couple of guitars, and we started to buy and sell together. This is late 68, 1969, 69 definitely. And from 69 and 70, we became part of the group of people in America that sought out guitars, mandolins, and banjos, especially Martin guitars, Gibson mandolins. In New York, D'Angelico guitars, banjos, Vega banjos, IEC Fairbanks banjos, Paramount banjos, Bacon and Day. So Stanley and I really concentrated on trying to find great instruments, get them to Staten Island, restore them, and with whatever restoration had to happen, and then resell them and reinvest. And so by 1971, it was ongoing enough, with enough money come and going, that we decided to incorporate. And we named the company Mandolin Brothers Limited, Ltd. And Stanley was president, and I was vice president. And at the time, I was living at 580 Bay Street, and so we used my living room of my apartment as our showroom. And that's before we got to Forest Avenue. So that's 72, 73, and I think in 74 we purchased Mandolin Brothers building on the corner of Forest and Oakland. And we continued to grow. We were fortunate. Again, Stanley was basically a doctorate of English. Stanley went to Penn State, graduated Penn State, got his master's, and it was convinced by a buddy of his to move to Staten Island for his doctorate program, which he did at Wagner College. And in the very end, he stopped before actually receiving the doctorate. He took a hiatus, and He was proficient though. He understood how to write and spent the rest of his life publishing through the Mandolin Brothers catalogs. So Stanley actually was able to use everything he was educated for to benefit himself as a professional salesperson or company owner in the music business. And I was, again, I'll say it again, I was extremely fortunate to meet Stanley.
I used to stop in the Mandolin Brothers occasionally. There'd always be some reason. Guitar players doing what they do. There's nothing to do. Let's go look at guitars. So, we'd go over there. And I know a lot. I mean, George Harrison had bought something there. And, a lot of the sort of the A-team players would buy guitars from these guys. So, we'd stop. It was, it was a Staten Island thing. We'd stop by and all that. I think I might have bought a few electric guitars from those guys back then, but I don't remember. It was a really long time ago.
How about, do you know other musicians that used them or went there or?
Everybody on Staten Island, all the guitar players knew who Mandolin Brothers were, and we'd all been to the shop at one point or another. I didn't know anybody that had any kind of a close relationship with anybody from there. Like I said, I would pop in. I do remember, when I met Hap Kuffner, and then over the years seeing him as he moved his career to other places. But, I never really had all that much contact with those guys. But we did know that was like, if you wanted to get the real deal and you had the money to get the real deal, you went there. And at the time when we first started going there, I didn't have the money for the real deal. So I'd go and look. Wow, look at that. It's a 1954, it's a 1960 this. And it's like, yeah, look at the price tag. Yeah, we'll wait till Eric Clapton comes and buys one. It ain't going to be me.
We were talking about Mandolin Brothers before, too. And I knew Stanley J. And I still know Hap. He was one of the original guys. Stanley J and Hap. Hap's a wonderful guy. Stanley J passed away a while ago, but I would go there occasionally. He remembered me and stuff, so he was always real nice to me. The store was great, and you got to see all this expensive stuff, but they didn't let you upstairs with the real expensive stuff, $80,000, $90,000. You just got to see the $10,000 stuff. But that was a cool place. A lot of people went in and out of there. I don't know. I had my parents bought me a Les Paul Jr. for $5 at a yard sale. I needed some work, and I brought it there. And my friend Flip taught me how to fix guitars, Flip Scipio, and I fix guitars. I still do it, but I don't have as much work as I used to. I used to be at Richmond Music, but he sold his store. Now we're at Phoenix, and I just give lessons. They rent a room, I give a lesson, and then somebody will come in and say, I need a guitar fixed. But it used to be they'd bring it to the store to get fixed. Now they don't really know, so they don't really bring them. So, but I fix guitars. In fact, there was a time when on Staten Island I was the only authorized Fender technician. Not a luthier, by the way. I couldn't. My friend Flip, you could run over a guitar with a truck, and he could fix it. You know what I mean? He could do anything. So I'm just more setups and trim this and turn that and get it right. But still, I was the only guy in Staten Island, but not anymore, and that's okay. I still like fixing guitars. No stress.
Hi, I'm Carlos Trapp, guitar teacher, a music educator, singer-songwriter here in Staten Island, and friend of Stan J and his family. And you're wondering, the first time I ever encountered Stan at Mandolin Brothers? I don't know. I think it was eons ago. I miss Stan J because Stan J was a big Carlos Trapp. Stan J loved me as a music teacher. Like I said, he let me teach his kids. And when you are a person of that stature, whose life is all about the guitar, and you give your kids over to someone, that's an incredible show of respect. And so I miss that because there is nobody like him on Staten Island who's recommending me for guitar lessons like Stan, you know. But I miss having mandolin brothers just in the neighborhood. You know, you could walk around because I lived around the corner from him. So just like there was the bank and the liquor store or the pastry shop, there was Mandolin Brothers. You know, I could walk around the corner to all of those, and I miss that. You know, just that building, Mandolin Brothers. You know, there was only one. You know, and some of the best guitar repair people came out of Mandolin Brothers. Like there was Flip Scipio and Mr. Aiello, who is down on the shore now, and Rocco Monterosso, who's still doing guitars for us, and you know, all of those guys. Thankful for all of those guys, and can't replace a place like Mandolin Brothers. You know, it's one of a kind. One of the beautiful things about Mandolin Brothers was you could just go there and just hang out. You know, you can disappear into one of the back rooms. I'd been going to the place for probably 20 years before I realized that there was an acoustic guitar room that I didn't know about. You know, and it was wonderful. But you could go to any of those rooms and sit there and play one of the instruments, you know, for your heart's content, you know, and we missed that. We sure do. We really miss it there, you know. Stan, wherever you are, we love you. We're all thankful that we had Mandolin Brothers in our lives, because it was one of those places that was kind of magical. You'd go in there. And, you know, there was somebody I was talking to recently said, yeah, I was in there one day, and it's like, you know, I hear this voice behind me and says, oh yeah, you know, so I brought this instrument, I have this thing, and he says, I turn around, it's Paul McCartney, you know, and, you know, we all know about Joni Mitchell, you know, coming there and, you know, writing a song about it and everything. So it was one of those magical places, you know. And I've always, to me, any music store is a magical place. But, you know, that had the ambiance of Stan, who was kind of like a Zen Buddhist master of acoustic stringed instruments, you know. I'm sure that he had more knowledge than, like I said, a Zen Buddhist master has that special knowledge, you know, that comes from years of studying and being around other Zen Buddhist masters, you know. And he was a wonderful, gracious man who was a great supporter to me as far as my being a music teacher on Staten Island. He let me teach his kids, you know. So that was a wonderful boost, and he always recommended me. You know, he really helped my practice here on Staten Island, because he was always recommending me for guitar lessons. And we miss him tremendously, because there aren't many people like that who have that knowledge of those stringed instruments, and you know, who can tell you when you come in, you take the guitar out, and he says, oh yeah, that's spruce, you know, that comes from, you know, Argentina. That, you know, they stopped doing that in 1943, you know, because of the war, and you know, that kind of knowledge, you know. And or some people would say, yeah, you know, he could look at you and hear you play and say, you should be playing that Gibson. Why don't you try this Gibson here? And they'd give the guy the Gibson, and all of a sudden it's like the guy would feel like, I'm at home. You know, he had that kind of, intuition, you know. And there are probably very few people like that here in the United States, or maybe the world. he was I'd say a guitar geek's geek. You know, he was the other guys who were like him. You know, would look up to him. You know, it's, oh, you know, I don't know, but you could ask Stan. He'd probably know about that. You know, that kind of knowledge. You know, and we miss him greatly. You know. So I remember, I distinctly remember when Mandolin Brothers was in Stapleton, because my dad was a pool player. Certainly not professionally or anything like. He liked playing pool, and he wanted to take his son to play pool. There was a pool hall. I want to say, I forget the exact street, but whatever street Mandolin Brothers was on, it was at the end of it by Water Street. And so we would take the train from Oakwood Heights to Stapleton, get off the train station, and if I'm not mistaken, Mandolin Brothers was right off the train station. You could the building that Mandolin Brothers was in originally, on the second floor, was right by the train station in Stapleton. And I remember, because I was about probably 9 or 10 years old at the time, or 11, and I remember passing by the sign for Mandolin Brothers on the building and thinking, oh, I'd like to go in there one day. And then my dad would take me to the pool hall, and we'd play 9-ball for the afternoon or early evening. Anyway, then I'm not sure what year Mandolin Brothers moved to Forest Avenue. Do you guys know what year that was? No? No one knows? No. Okay. But what I do remember, so let me just preface this by when I was in that band, when I was in that band with the Rayo Brothers, and subsequent bands after that, and in my high school years, because we had remained friends even though I wasn't in the band anymore. We did remain friends, and we were it was it was a very popular thing to be in a bunch of different bands at once. And so I was probably in a couple of different bands with the Rayo Brothers over the years, but one of the things that I remember most was this guy who made pickups, and we heard about him through mutual friends. And there was this guy down on Van Duzer Street who was winding pickups for people, and if you asked him, he'd wind a pickup for your guitar. It wound up being Larry DiMarzio. He had this little tiny shop right on Van Duzer Street at the corner before. Again, I don't know the exact cross street, but the building is still there. I'll never forget, it was a white door on the corner that faced catty corner to the block, to the building. And that's where Larry started. Larry DiMarzio started making pickups in that building. And he would wind pickups for you if you were, if he liked you. I wound up buying a couple of guitars from Larry over the years, and I still have the bass that I have a precision bass that I bought from Larry in 1982 or 83, I think. But Larry's a great guy. He's another Staten Islander that became very, very successful. And then there was always this kind of this idea that if you really wanted a really, really good guitar, you went to Mandolin Brothers. If you wanted a really good vintage guitar, you wouldn't go to Manny's, you wouldn't go to Sam Ash, you wouldn't go to Rudy's, you wouldn't go to Alex, which was all those 4 stores that I just mentioned were on 48th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. That was Music Row. Unfortunately, there's none of them there today, but they were all there at the peak of the music, the music fad for musicians,
in the 70s and 80s and the 90s too. I believe, I don't know when Manny's closed. But if you wanted a new guitar, you went to Manny's or Sam Ash or Rudy's or Alex. But if you wanted a really vintage instrument, you went to the Mandolin Brothers. And I'll never forget the first time I went in there. I was probably in my early 20s or late teens. And just looking around, the great thing about Mandolin Brothers was you could go in there, sit down in one of the rooms, because there was a bunch of little rooms off of the main showroom, and there was guitars everywhere. And there would always be a little stool in there, and you could sit and play, and no one would bother you. You could play an instrument for an hour, and no one would come in and say, "Are you going to buy that, or are you just going to play it?" So I would go in there and I would take a look at guitars and wish that I could afford them, because the prices were always astronomical there. I could never afford one of their guitars that I would really want, like a 1945 D28, or this Martin that you couldn't find anywhere else. They always had like specialty instruments. That's what Stan really, that was his thing, was finding stuff that you couldn't find anywhere else. And it was a great store to be in and be around. I've bought some guitars over there over the years, but they were Stan and his partner. Who was this? Hap. Well, Hap. There was Hap, Stan, and there was another person too.
The one after Hap.
Stan and I want to say Al. I don't know. It was Stan, and there was always two guys in there. Do we know who the other guy was? No, we don't. Okay. Yeah. So I Stan was he was a good guy. He would always talk to you. He'd always spend a little time with you, but Stan was all about business. He was definitely a businessman, and he was an encyclopedia of knowledge when it came to vintage instruments, whether it was an electric guitar, or an original Les Paul, or some brand new D'Angelica, or a National that was like you've never seen before, or Mandocello, or just like really kind of kooky instruments, of a banjo, mandolin. Stan knew about it, where it came from, when it was invented, who invented it, the year the guy was born, when he died, and what it's worth. And so if you needed to know something about an instrument, you went to Stan, and if he was in a good mood, he'd tell you. But if he wasn't in a good mood, if he was having a bad day, you couldn't pry anything out of him. One of the best things about Mandolin Brothers was not only the selling and buying of instruments, because I bought some instruments there over the years, and I've also sold them some instruments over the years. It was repair work, and for the longest time, I would get my guitars fixed at Mandolin Brothers, because you knew that if you went there, you might pay a little bit extra, but it was worth the extra money to get your guitar repaired by somebody like Leroy Aiello or Flip, or and then there were a couple other people over the years. But if you had a guitar worked on at Mandolin Brothers, you knew that it was going to be worked on correctly, and that you were going to get it back in just as good, if not better, condition than when you brought it in. I've brought my 60s P basses in there to be repaired. I had my dad bought a guitar when he was in his early 30s. Just before I think just after I was born, actually, there was a guitar luthier and maker in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue called Del Pilar, and Del Pilar made classical guitars. My dad bought a classical guitar from him in 1954, and the guitar fell into disrepair, and I brought it to Mandolin Brothers to be repaired. I believe Leroy worked on it, if I'm not mistaken, and I still have the guitar in my collection, and I just he did such a great job on it, because my dad's been gone for a while, but you know, he loved this guitar. It's actually my first introduction to instruments was this Del Pilar classical guitar that my dad bought. It was made just for him, and I still have the receipt from it. And I think my father was paying like $10 a week until he paid it off. Then he could take it. It took maybe about a year and a half, or $10 a month, something like that. Anyway, there was very few people that I would entrust fixing that guitar, and Leroy and Mandolin Brothers were the place that I brought it to be repaired. So, you know, I mean, the other thing too is that you knew that when you walked in the door that you were going to pay a little bit more than you would in any other music store, but it was worth it at the end of the day, because I don't think Stan kept anything in there that wasn't special, you know, and especially when it came to vintage instruments. He was all about, Stan and Hap for that matter were all about what makes an instrument special. Why is this what separates this instrument from another one? You know, what is it? The sound? Is it the history of it? Is it the pedigree? And you always knew that you had a special guitar if you bought it at Mandolin Brothers. Now, I'm a touring musician along with the other, my record work and my songwriting, but I am a touring musician, and I travel all over the world, and I could be in Tokyo, and people know Mandolin Brothers. I could be in Europe, and people know Mandolin Brothers. And you live on Staten Island? Isn't that where Mandolin Brothers is? And that's a great thing. Have you ever gone there? Yeah, I go there all the time. I know Stan. And you know, a lot of people say I know Stan, but not too many people knew Stan. Like, if I walked in there today and Stan was still with us, he'd be like, "Do I know you? You know, do I know who you are? Yeah, I'm Kasim, Stan. I've been here a million times. Oh yeah. It's good to see you." But he was a really, really good guy, really nice guy. Horrible to negotiate with, but a good guy.
Hi, I'm Leroy Aiello, former head of repair from Mandolin Brothers in Staten Island, New York. I started in 1987 at Mandolin Brothers, and I was there for 23 years, and that was my college and my schooling. I studied under Stan Jay, and I also studied repairs under Flip Scipio. Stan was a mentor to me, as Flip was a mentor. Flip taught me how to use tools and how to repair guitars. Stan taught me how to look at guitars and how to listen to them. Mandolin Brothers was a special place, And a lot of people say that. It may sound like a blanket statement, but it was a special place. It was a little tucked out of the way in Staten Island. But when you walked in and got past the desk in the front, you were in Mecca. And Stan always had open arms, and he always said to people, play anything you want to play in the store. Everything that's there, ask questions, take off your jacket and your belt buckle, and have at it and play. One great thing I remember about Stan was a mother and father came in with their young boy who had just graduated, I believe, high school. And they were buying him a present. They were buying him a Martin D18. So Stan put a couple on the floor so he could pick, and goes in the back closet and pulls out an original 1930s Martin D18 and hands it to the boy and says, "This is what it should sound like." And the boy came off of his feet. He was elated, and that was Stan. He wanted you to play the great stuff. He didn't put it with please don't touch signs. He wanted you to experience what was special about that instrument, about, you know, any instrument that was in the place. And that was what was special about Mandolin Brothers and about Stan and about the whole staff. We all had the attitude of, let's share this great thing we call guitars. And we had all walks. We had everybody. We had famous people, not so famous people. We had collectors. We had the 13-year-old with his very first guitar. And we treated everybody like they were a star. We treated everybody the same. When they came in, they wanted strings. That was a big purchase. They wanted a $100,000 guitar. That was a big purchase. Everything was the same. And in the repair shop, we did the same exact thing. We treated everybody with respect, and everybody's guitar was as important as everybody else's on our benches. All the years at Mandolin Brothers, I can say, have groomed me to have my own shop and to continue the care and the love and the interest and pass it on to anybody I can that comes into my shop for me to repair their instruments and evaluate their instruments. And that's all due to Stan J and Flip Scipio. The two of those guys, again, were my teachers and my mentors. And you almost can't pay for an education like that, in my opinion. You know, no offense to anybody to pay for an education, but I feel like without Mandolin Brothers, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And there's not many long time places like that have been around for many years, and Mandolin Brothers was a special place. My tenure at Mandolin Brothers was not just a job, it was an education, and a complete education from start to finish for 23 years. I never stopped learning. It was invaluable to me, and to pay for an education like that, no offense to anybody to pay for an education, but it was priceless to me. It was, besides being a job, it was complete immersion in learning every day. Stan would call me on the phone, "Leroy, you got to come up and look at this." And I would go upstairs, and it would be something like this that I'm working on in my shop. This is a 1919 Gibson. And we would see stuff like this all the time. You got to see this. This is rare. You got to see this. And then we would try to go into forensics and try to figure it out. Well, no, this is this, and this was replaced. And no, that's not replaced. That's original. I've never seen that company do that before. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Bouncing things off of each other and knowledge kind of bouncing around all over the place, which was great. You know, you just grab whatever you can grab. And that's, again, helped me to have my own shop. In 2010, I left Mandolin Brothers and I opened my own shop in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And I still do the same type of repairs that I did at Mandolin Brothers. I do vintage repairs and restorations, but I'll do anything that has strings on it and that has heart behind it and a great player, and even a not so great player. Anybody that wants to play music is a great player in my opinion. So those years at Mandolin Brothers are invaluable to me. They're priceless, and I thank Stan, I thank his family, and everybody that I worked with there.
Before I start talking about Mandolin Brothers, I want to talk briefly about 48th Street, which was kind of the mecca, the nirvana of musical instruments in New York City. Manny's Music was there, Sam Ash, Rudy's, Alex Music, We Buy Guitars, which was just guitar after guitar in the window. And you would just go in there and just gawk from store to store. And it was a dream for any guitarist. And the unfortunate part of that was when you would go into a store and you would just like want to play something, if you didn't pull out a wad of cash, they really pretty much ignored you. As opposed to going to Mandolin Brothers. The first time I went to Mandolin Brothers, here I am gawking at 1977 or 78, whatever it was, a 25th anniversary Les Paul. And I was just standing there, and I remember Stan J coming out of his office, and he looks at me, looks at the guitar, and he goes, "You want to play it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Take it down." And ever since that time, it was like a place to go, a place to just hang out, to see great musical instruments, to hear stories, meet people. It was just an amazing place that people from all around the world came to, bought guitars, from John McLaughlin to George Harrison, Joni Mitchell, and here it was on Staten Island, a gem, So, fast forward into the future, friends of mine are working there. Leroy Aiello is the head of the repair shop, and it was just, probably once a week I'd be there, And, then you have this problem because you start seeing guitars and like, oh, I really want that one. And this one is pretty nice too. And then you just get into that whole guitar head, which they call GAS, which is Gear Acquisition Syndrome, which I think many guitarists have that problem. And I'm one of them. A year or two ago, I remember my younger daughter just saying to me, "Dad, why do you have so many guitars?" And I'm thinking about the answer, and I said, people collect art, and they pay lots of money for Picassos and Boteros and Van Goghs. To me, a guitar is a piece of art, but it's better because instead of just hanging it on the wall, you could actually hang it on the wall, take it down, and start playing it. So I just think this is just a piece of art from top to the bottom. And although I mostly electric guitarist, I used to go in there, play some of the high-end acoustic guitars, which were just amazing, and I couldn't afford, so I just played them, which was great to play them. And then you put it down and you went home and you played your little shit box at home, but it was just a place to say, maybe one day I'll get this. But electric guitar is a different thing. There's this one in particular is a Gibson Les Paul. It's a Jimmy Page model. Actually, Jimmy Page's signature kind of was on the pickguard. I should have just took the pickguard off. It kind of got ruined with time, and Les Paul signed it. So it's very special to me. My wife gave it to me as a gift in like 1992, whatever. Bought from Charlie Della Valle at Mandolin Brothers. And to me, it's gorgeous. I mean, you have the matching stripes on the top of it, and it has all the switches that Jimmy Page had in his guitars, and it's pretty cool. So
later on in life, I had a cover band. We hadn't played a lot, and I decided at one point I'd want to be a concert promoter. So I took on the St. George Theater. It was a stupid thing to do, but I thought I could do it without help. I did it. Lost a lot of money, but we had some fun. I did 40 major rock and roll shows there. The first one was Alice Cooper. Now, being in the St. George Theater and promoting, I needed places to get flyers out. So I'd go to different little businesses on Staten Island and put a stack of flyers and tell the owners, here's two complimentary tickets to you, come to the show. And that's how I first met Stan at Mandolin Brothers. I'd heard about Mandolin Brothers. Anybody who was a musician on Staten Island heard about Mandolin Brothers. It was quite famous for celebrities. I think Bob Dylan, George Harrison, maybe a bunch of celebrities that come and bought stuff there, and everyone knew about it. And it was just really great collectible guitars and mandolins, a little more expensive than I wanted to pay, but it was just an incredible place. So I went there and asked Stan if I could put my stack of flyers to promote my Alice Cooper show. He said, sure, put your flyers there. I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Dean Halterman, Stan J. Nice to meet you. And he said, anytime, just bring flyers and put them right here on the counter. So I did. So that was my first meeting with Stan. So we did the 40 shows at the St. George. I promoted all every time at Stan's. We pretty much were out of business in a year and a half. My last show was very successful, though I didn't promote it. But I had the bar and a liquor license there. We did George Thorogood. There was like 4,500 people in that place for George Thorogood. Anyway, from there I moved on to the Wave Street Club. Opened up a very successful nightclub. Same thing, promoting at Stan, getting to know Stan a little more. Never bought a guitar there, but always looked at guitars and just saw these incredible guitars. Beautiful collection of guitars. Well known for that around the world, I think. But at the Wave Club, I did a lot of track acts. I did rock and roll, Joe Hansen and Twisted Sister and a whole bunch of the Ramones. But we did track acts in this one act, or we did Joe Jackson. Now, Leroy Aiello, who ends up being Stan's main repair guy at Mandolin Brothers, brother Tony Aiello was in the Joe Jackson band at the time, as well as Vinny Zumo, the guitar player with Staten Island. And so I got to meet Leroy. We spoke a little bit the night Joe played at the club. It didn't go so well. Joe was kind of arrogant to the Staten Island people, but we had 1,000 people there. So me and Leroy kind of met, and then all of a sudden Leroy's road managing for this girl, Nancy Martinez, this very famous track act who had a couple of hit songs out from Canada. And he would come into the club with Nancy, and we'd hang out. And I had a recording studio upstairs in Wave Street. And Leroy said, I play guitar. Let me hear you play. The kid played for me. I was like blown away. The guy's like an incredible guitar player. He says, hey, I want to start a band. Want to be in my band? And Leroy said, yeah, let's start a band together. So I started having a band with Leroy. And at that point, he says, you know, I got a beautiful guitar. Stan's looking to get rid of it for a pretty good price, a 12-string Ovation. I think it would look good with you. So I said, we'll bring it over. He brought it over, and I bought this beautiful 12-string Ovation from Mandolin Brothers, because Leroy recommended it. And that was it. We had a band together. We played about 4 or 5 gigs, and then that ended. But later on in life, I would get to know Stan more and more, because Dan Master was one of my best friends. Was very close to Stan. They were like best friends. So I would go to events at Dan's house, and Stan would be there, and his wife Bea, who I got to meet, and always pleasurable people to be with. Just top notch, top of the line, beautiful people. And then Bea one time came down to record in the recording studio that I had with Ron Thor, Bumblefoot, and Frankie LaRocca. So Dan Master was recording there, and he brought Bea in to play the cello, I believe. So Stan showed up with his wife Bea, and they hung out in the studio, and Bea played some cello on one of Dan's songs. And that's pretty much my relationship with Stan, but always was wonderful. And Mandolin Brothers it's just such a memorable place, because it was something way out of the ordinary. We had nothing else like that on Staten Island. I don't think there was anything else like that in all of New York City, maybe, because they were very high-end, incredible collectible guitars, and just come in and play it. Anyway, my good friend Leroy Aiello, who was the main guitar repair guy at Mandolin Brothers, said, Dean Holt, I have this fabulous guitar you should own. So he brings us to practice one night, and I said, you gotta fall in love with it. It is beautiful. It is an Ovation. And he says, Stan wants to get rid of it for a good price. I think it was $1,100, which was originally listed for $1,500. And I says, all right, I'll buy it. I had money at the time. I said, yeah, give me that guitar.
Anyway, so we bought it, and me and Leroy played in a band together for a while. And the funny thing about it, Mikey Flasher, a lot of my Staten Island friends who know Mikey Flasher, my good pal, I love Mikey. He was playing rhythm guitar in the band with us. And I said, Mikey, would you use this? He hated playing his guitar because it's a 12 string. It's a little tougher on the fingers. I said, but you look so good with it, Mikey. So he played this Mandolin Brothers Ovation in the Dean Holster Band, I think we were calling it. And that's my story. The only guitar I ever bought from Mandolin Brothers is just beautiful Ovation.
My name's Dan Master. I'm a guitar player and songwriter, and grew up most of my life on Staten Island since I was 12 years old. And I would say I first met Stan in around 1980, so I probably knew him for quite a few years. And met him the way many people met him, in the store, not down on Bay Street, but when he went to Forest Avenue. And we struck up a friendship from just my going to the store fairly regularly and my interest in vintage guitars and his interest in vintage guitars. And from that friendship, we became a musical duo. We played together for, I'd say, at least 20 years. Stan was essentially a second guitarist, something that became quite popular in the 1960s, which was kind of the era in which he grew up with folk music. We were exactly 10 years apart, almost to the day. So our taste in music was similar but not identical. The folk music that he was brought up on was probably things from the early 1960s, whereas I was a folkie from the early 1970s, the singer-songwriter movement, James Taylor and people like that. But we played together for many years. In fact, in 2005, Stan was my second guitarist at the Boston Folk Festival. A song of mine called Chardonnay was nominated for Best Song at the festival, and Stan came up to the festival and played with me at the festival, which was, I think, a moment that we both treasured. The store was truly a mecca for vintage guitar players and vintage guitar fans. That's why you had so many accomplished artists going to the store. You could find things there that you would only find there. Vintage guitars, and I guess the purest definition of that would be fretted American instruments prior to 1969, or it would include 1969, up to and including 1969, especially vintage Martin guitars, vintage Gibson guitars, but many other makes as well. Stan also sold guitars from more modern and contemporary makers, but the one-of-kind stuff were usually instruments from the 1930s to the late 1960s of those companies. And if you wanted to find a 00H Martin from 1939 or 1942, you weren't going to find it anywhere other than Stan's, or possibly at Gruhn's, or possibly Richard Johnston out in California. But Stan was certainly one of the big three when it came to being knowledgeable about vintage stringed instruments from the United States. And the store was a magnet for people who were interested in those instruments. That ranged from amateurs to the very greatest professionals. Of course, George Harrison visited the store, and Paul McCartney's bass was repaired there. Joni Mitchell went to the store. I met Janis Ian at the store. It was really a place where people interested in fine guitars would make a pilgrimage. Stan's policy was to really let anyone play any guitar, which is very different from other guitar stores, where if a guitar is particularly valuable, it's a $5,000 guitar or a $10,000 guitar, people would not let you go near it. Stan's policy was you can play anything in the store. And that was unique for its time, and probably unique for today as well. So it was a very welcoming place. The store was very much like Stan himself, very friendly, very approachable. And it was truly a mecca, was truly a meeting point and a magnet for people who loved fretted instruments. It's hard for me to say, it's not for me to say, but I was probably one of his closest friends. We played a lot of concerts together over a period of about 20 years. He enjoyed the role of being a second guitarist. His wife Bea made many recordings of us playing together. Stan would have music parties at his home, and I would be invited to those. I was, as I mentioned before, I was considerably younger than Stan and his other folky friends. Stan started playing with others, I believe, in the early 1960s. That was part of what they called the Great Folk Scare of the 1960s. And that's when he started playing with the Penn State Folkies, a bunch of people from his college days. And they have continued playing to this day and will rent out a place in rural Pennsylvania and play for an entire weekend and eat together and commune together. It's quite an interesting group, and I believe they're still around. I haven't seen them for the last few years, but I believe they're still going strong. Yeah, I really can't say that I was one of his best friends. I was certainly somebody who we played guitar with regularly, and we ate dinner regularly. I'm an attorney, and I think Stan got most of his legal advice from Morty, Morty and myself, which we were, always pleased to give him. He had given us so much, and Morty Jacoby. He had enriched our lives so much, and we would certainly help him out when he had legal questions to be answered. So it was a very nice relationship that I had with Stan for many, many years. The street namings are really a function of the New York City Council in New York City, and it really pretty much starts with an expression of interest and a petition of community interest. And of course, there were many people who wanted to sign on to see that corner at Forest Avenue named after him because, let's face it, mandolin had become, as I said before, a mecca for people from around the world. So Stan really made that corner famous with his store being there for so many years. And it was a community movement that resulted in the street corner being named after him. But there were many people involved. Just because I was involved in New York City government at the time doesn't mean that I pushed it through or I was the doer or the maker behind it. There were many people who were involved. It was a community effort, and one well-deserved. I think that the honor was well-deserved to name that corner after Stan.
A friend of mine that used to work on my guitars when I used to live in Tucasa Studio. This is a very long time ago, so it's got to be 74, 75. And he used to repair my guitars and adjust them. I had a Strat. He did all these crazy things on it, give it a saddle underneath the neck so it wouldn't vibrate. He was just really good at what he did. But one of the things he told me was that he worked at Mandolin Brothers in Staten Island. And at that time, I had never really been to Staten Island unless I was passing in a car and we took the ferry. At that time, they still had the cars going on the ferries. And so eventually, I wanted to know what Mandolin Brothers was. So years and years and years went by. And I was working for DiMarzio. I was running their shipping department. And Mandolin Brothers came up because they were on Staten Island. DiMarzio is also on Staten Island. So I went over and I remember going there, going in, not really knowing anybody. But I did introduce myself to Stan and told him, that I worked for DiMarzio. And I was just coming by to look at the place. And I had this old friend of mine that used to work for him. And he remembered who he was and whatever. And I went in and I was just blown away by the instruments that they had. I mean, not only mandolins, acoustic guitar, basses, electric guitars. and the tech guys and everything. So I grabbed the 12 string, and usually when you went to a music store, you grabbed the 12 string. They were never tuned. And this was tuned, and it sounded beautiful, and I just got carried away and started playing some of my original stuff. And so, I'm playing, and I'm just carrying away, there's nobody really there. I'm playing this 12 string and just doing some of my original stuff and whatever. And all of a sudden I feel something on my shoulder, and it was Stan throwing a t-shirt on my shoulder. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's a t-shirt for you." I said, "For what?" He says, "For your playing. I really like what you were doing." So that was basically our introduction together. The funny thing is that, I went there a lot to bring instruments, to buy strings, to see what he had, to bring friends, because the place had such a big reputation, George Harrison had been there, and a bunch of other people to buy some of his instruments. So, they had a really big reputation. So, with time, I got to know Stan better and better, and just, we had a nice relationship. I went to Puerto Rico, and when I was in Puerto Rico, my father and my brother were there, and they took out this old Martin guitar that I had growing up, and they said, "Here, it's for you." And I had this guitar since I was like 11 or 14 years old, because it was my father's and I used to play it all the time. And I was surprised that they still had it, but somebody had tried to fix it and it was in terrible condition. And when they brought it out to me, they figured there was no value to it, or maybe I would appreciate it. And I did say to them, this is a very valuable guitar. And they said, it's okay, take it, whatever. So I brought it back to New York. I had it in my studio. But, with the changes of seasons in New York, hot, cold, whatever, the guitar was deteriorating. It was lifting up on the board. I didn't have no strings on it anymore. It was just in really bad condition, apart from the fact that these people had worked on it. They didn't know what they were doing. So I brought it to Mandolin Brothers, and when I came in with it, Stan saw me, but one of his other employees that I really never had met before was going to take care of me. And Stan sat a little distance away. He knew who I was. He just didn't say a word. He wanted to see how I was going to be taken care of. Well, the gentleman that was started to take care of me, he said, "So what's up?" And I said, "Well, I got this Martin." And before I even said anything, the guy said to me, "Just because you find an instrument at a flea market doesn't mean," and started lecturing me about old stuff and this and whatever. And I looked at Stan, didn't say anything, and I said, "Listen, I don't know what you think, but this guitar was handed down to me by my father. And he gave it to me recently, but he's had it in the family for many, 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 many years." So the guy immediately was in shock. And then Stan got into the conversation and told his employee, "I know Pupa, I'll take care of him." And he said, "This is good. This is really nice. Let me check with Martin, whatever." So he did some phone calls, and it turned out that this had a cherry back to it. I thought it was a D18, but I think it was a D22. And Stan tells me, "Listen, Pupa, this is like a rare guitar." It was a 1954, by the way. My father had given it to me. And by now, the guy is like, the other employee, he's like, "Oh boy, I messed this up really big." Stan says to me, "Why don't we check with Martin and see if we can get this appraised and see what kind of value it has and how much it'll cost to get it fixed." So when he came back, he said, "Pupa, it's going to be like a couple of grand or more just to get it fixed. And unfortunately, I really didn't have the money, and I said, Stan, thank you, but I can't really do that. And I was getting ready to leave. This was the second time I was getting ready to leave. And Stan calls me back. He says, Pupa, come here. I don't do this for everybody. But if you want, I'll put up the money to get it fixed. And I said, you would do that? And I didn't want the guitar to fall apart. My father had owned it. It was in the family. And I knew if I kept it in that condition, it wasn't gonna last. And at least if we got it fixed, somebody might own it, and it'll have another lifetime of people playing it. So we sent it off to Martin, and there was a big list for people to repair instruments, so it did not get repaired right away. And unfortunately, Stan became ill. And I said, he's a good businessman. He's a good friend. The last thing I want to do is to be harassing him about something financial or an instrument. And sure enough, several months later, he passed away. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to leave it in God's hand. Whatever happens, happens. If I need to go back, I'll go back, but I'm going to give it time. And 4 or 5 months after his death, I did get reimbursed for the instrument. The instrument got fixed, was sold, and he compensated me, plus, the money that was put into the instrument. That was one of my experiences with Stan. Even after he passed away, he came through. And I knew I didn't have to worry about it because I knew what kind of person he was. And just the fact that he loved the instrument, he knew what the instrument was, even in the condition that the instrument was in, he knew the value of it and everything. And I'm sure somebody has it now, that Martin D22, I think it is, with the cherry back to it, and it's completely renovated. I didn't get a chance to see it before it got sold, but I'm sure somebody that really appreciates instruments must have it right now and must be playing it. So that's my Stan story. Mofongo.
That was awesome, man. But interestingly enough, out of all those music stores, there's one music store that was featured in an amazing song by Joni Mitchell, which off of her record Hejira, the song Amelia. I think Amelia's the first tune on that record, and there's a lyric. I went to Staten Island to buy a mandolin, and she's talking about Mandolin Brothers. Now, I didn't really know so much about that history. Other than that song, I realized when I moved to Staten Island in the 90s and I went to Mandolin Brothers for the first time and met Stanley. I mean, this was the shop that Joni Mitchell was talking about. And I can totally get why Joni Mitchell was so moved as to write a song and include Mandolin Brothers in this incredible, iconic song. Because Stanley, I mean, there are a number of shop owners who were Matt Umanovs, who also went to Brooklyn Tech, nudge wink. Rudy Pensa, incredibly knowledgeable about guitars. Stanley, amongst his peers, was incredibly special. And that's because Stanley, nobody wrote about guitars and the stories of guitars to the level that Stanley wrote about them. I mean, I actually think there's a great coffee table book, because he wrote a newsletter, and he would send out this newsletter like every month, talking about the various guitars, and he would talk about tell the stories of the guitars he was selling, and he had the high-end things, and then he would have guitars on sale, and he had these witty, just asides, just describing them. And he, I think, was one of the greatest salesmen, and one of the greatest advocates for guitar, and one of the greatest salesmen of guitars that I've ever met. I mean, he would write about these instruments. He would take up a whole. There was one instrument that I think he had a guitar that Elvis gave to a woman, and he wrote. I think the newsletter he wrote this. I think almost the whole newsletter was the story about how Elvis met this woman and gave this woman this guitar, and you know what fine shape it was in, and of course the longer the post, the more expensive the guitar was going to be. So this was one of his, 6-figure joints, and this, so he was trying to get, it would just increase, the verbiage would increase. As if the price is going up, he wrote more and more about it. But he wrote beautifully. And he was just a wonderful presence. So intelligent, but really warm, and he loved guitar players, he loved music, and he loved the physical objects. He really had a feeling for them. And he loved luthiers. And in fact, he had just a number of great, his repair staff was second to none in the city. I mean, they were, that group of repairmen, like Leroy Aiello. Leroy Aiello in fact, Leroy Aiello was he still is, a forensic luthier. So when high-valued instruments, particularly Les Pauls, because Les Pauls shot up in value once Guns N' Roses became popular. It's funny, the vintage guitar market was very focused on Stratocasters, and it was very focused on Stratocasters because of Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck. He was very focused on Strat, even though Jeff Beck also played Les Pauls, but he was very focused on Strats. But when Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle, and all of that blew up, and Sweet Child of Mine, it's like the vintage market. Les Pauls went through the roof. So, like Les Pauls from the 60s and 50s, right, became super priced. And now the rarest ones are like in the six figures. So buying a Les Paul like that is a huge investment. And of course, that means that the fakers, the people making incredible reproductions, they're jumping in, to sell something that should be a 4 or 5 figure instrument for 6 figures. And Leroy was tasked with, there was going to be some businessman, investor, hedge fund guy, whatever, was going to buy this instrument for 6 figures. And this thing was flawless. I mean, he was looking at it and he was going, well, the finish is perfect. Everything was looking good. The serial number track. And then he went into the control cavity where all the knobs underneath. And he looked and he said, the chisels are all wrong. He said, they didn't use chisels like that in the 1950s. And that's how that person was caught. And that person, Leroy Aiello, he made his bones. He became who he became at Mandolin Brothers. So, I mean, it's just, I always felt warmly greeted, appreciated. I did a few sales and a few trades, and it's funny. There's one crazy story. I had a beautiful birdland. I had a beautiful birdland with the split maple top. I'm telling you, it was a guitar to die for. And I bought this guitar, from Greg Bales of Making Music, right? Great, guitar dealer. So I got this thing, and it was about $3,000. This lovely, lovely thing. And I used it, recording the second Living Color album, Time's Up. And I used it. There's a kind of quasi-jazz guitar solo on the song Undercover of Darkness, and I used the Birdland for that. And oh well, how can I explain this? I was in a fugue state. I kind of was. I was in a funky. I was getting divorced, and I was in a bad mood. And I took this guitar and I went down to Mandolin Brothers, and I said, get this out of my face, because that's how people do. It's not like I was in a headspace and I was whatever. I don't know. The guitar reminded me of her. What can I tell you? So I went and Stanley opened the case and went, wow, this is, so you sure you want to, this is funny. He said, are you sure you want to sell it? And I said, yeah, And about a month went by, and somewhere in that month, I woke up and I went, holy shit, I got to get my guitar back. I left the fugue state. The fugue that had me bring this incredible guitar to Stanley, I was like, holy shit, I got to get it back. So I marched down to Mandolin Brothers, and Stanley sees me, and he sees the look on my face, and he goes, oh no, Vernon, I've got a check for you. So he thought I was, gonna give him a piece of my mind or something. And he says, no man, I got a check for you, da da da. You made $1,000, and he sold it for $4,000. And I was so crestfallen, I totally confused him. Because he was like, well, I'm giving him money. Why does he look so sad? It's just one of those things. Stanley was a great guy. I loved him. I missed him. I mean, I was devastated. Really, the world of guitar, because he was known internationally for what he did, and it was a bad day, hearing that he passed. I mean, that was, a lot of people. I went to the memorial wake thing, and people were pretty distraught. And he was wonderful. He was a wonderful character, and just such a. People talk about a twinkle in their eye, and people say that, but there are very few people that actually manage a twinkle, an eye twinkle, and Stanley totally twinkled. He had the eye. We talked about guitar. He had a twinkle, and that's something I remember about him, and I'll always think about that twinkle in Stanley's eye, always.
A friend of mine who I'd met when I was freelancing was on vacation in France, and she saw a job ad on Craigslist, and it said Art Director Staten Island, and I applied for it. And when I got a phone call about that ad, it turned out to be from Mandolin Brothers. And I thought they were calling me about my Rickenbacker guitar that I had given I was going to give to Stan to have it worked on and possibly sell. And they said, no, Rickenbacker, what Rickenbacker? This is about a job. Did you apply for a job as an art director? And the ad did not mention Mandolin Brothers. So I said to myself, I have to take this job. It's the perfect job for me. I'm living in Staten Island. There'll be no commute. It's art and music, two of my favorite things. And of course, Mandolin Brothers is the most famous music emporium in the United States, if not the world. And I wound up getting the job, and hence started my relationship with Stan. Now, the job that I took was way behind in schedule and was really buried badly. And so Stan was a little bit impatient at first. But when he realized that I was smart enough to handle it and quick enough to get it done, we became close friends. And Stan, as you might know, is a wordsmith. He wrote great dialogue, clever turns of phrases about speaking about his vintage instruments. And me being a songwriter, I was big on writing headlines for agencies in Manhattan, things of that nature. So we hit it off right away. And eventually he just said, Lou, you write the headlines, which was an honor for me because he was famous for his wordplay. And so we became great friends. And we went through a lot of adventures together. Various people came to visit Mandolin Brothers, famous people. Paul McCartney sent his guitar in to be worked on. George Harrison drove up unannounced, and Stan turned around to greet the door, and there's George Harrison standing in front of him, which totally knocked him off his seat. and various other people, Jeff Goldblum, came in with Saffron Burrows because they were doing a police TV show, and they were filming at a Duffy's Tavern across the street. And Jeff is a very, very tall guy, very, very, very tall, and tan in the wintertime. And he turned out to be a very nice guy. He was interested in what I had to say. And Saffron Burrows, this beautiful girl that was with him, I said to Jeff, do you play the guitar? He says, no, I play the piano, but she plays the guitar. And Saffron said, yeah, I just made a movie called The Guitar. Have you seen it? Which I had not seen. And I wish I had, because about 2 weeks later, maybe a month later, the movie came on TV, The Guitar, starring Saffron Burrows, which was a great movie, really terrific, and became one of Stan and I's favorite movies. You see a lot of Saffron Burrows in that movie, but it's a great movie about a guitar and the music, the healing powers of music. And other people came in. George Benson's wife came in to inquire about purchasing Wes Montgomery's L5 guitar, which was given to Mandolin Brothers to sell on consignment. And it was a noticeably, you could tell it was his guitar because Wes Montgomery had a white Valentine heart in the corner of the guitar. And so it became sort of a legendary guitar. Everybody knew what it looked like. And that would have been quite a feather in our cap to sell George Benson Wes Montgomery's guitar. It didn't happen, but it was still a very great story, and we have the photographs documenting the whole procedure. Judy Collins came in and spent the whole day and bought, I think, a Martin guitar. Joni Mitchell famously came in and bought a mandolin and wrote a song about it. Went to Staten Island to buy a mandolin. And she also bought a 1918 Martin acoustic, I believe. And over the years, of course, celebrities came. I wasn't always there when they did walk in. Edie Brickell bought a guitar for Paul Simon, and Bob Dylan supposedly bought something from us. In other adventures, one time I was at Mandolin Brothers not long ago, and the phone rang, and Eric J., Stan's son, picked up the phone. And he says, Lou, apparently this person on the phone is someone famous. And I said, oh, what's his name? And he said, what's your name? Justin Hayward. And I said, Justin Hayward? Justin Hayward is from the Moody Blues. Are you from the Moody Blues? Justin Hayward from the Moody Blues. He plays an ES 345 red Gibson guitar. You play an ES 340? Yes, that's the guitar. Then I had to try to explain to Eric how important Justin Hayward is and what a talented guy he is. And Eric being from the younger generation, Eric is a musician and he knows music, but he didn't particularly know the Moody Blues. And I'm saying, the Moody Blues, Nice and White Satin, Tuesday Afternoon. Then I started naming the albums, Threshold of a Dream, Search for the Lost Chord. None of this communicated with him. I tried to think, what is the one song that everybody would know that the Moody Blues did if it wasn't Nice and White Satin? But that was the kind of thing that happened often. Famous people would gravitate towards Mandolin Brothers. At the time that I got the job working for Mandolin Brothers, as I said, the advertising business was pretty much dried up. So I always appreciated, and I told Stan many times, that he saved me, because we were basically, I was unemployed for a long time, and we needed a job and we needed money, and this was the perfect marriage of music and art. So I always thank Stan for saving us from going off the edge. And when Stan passed away, right before he passed away, he was in the hospital for a long period of time. And he got to the point where he couldn't recognize either his family or his friends or pretty much anyone. And the story goes that, Allison told me the story, that Martin, the guitar company, delivered a guitar for Stan in the hospital. When Stan was laying in bed, couldn't recognize people, they put the guitar on Stan's lap, on his chest, laying in bed. and he stared at it for a while, and he picked it up and he played it. Even though he couldn't remember people, he didn't forget how to play the guitar, which is quite amazing. And I should have asked Allison, what song did he play? That would be the question mark. Like, all right, so he picked up the guitar, facing on the brink of passing away. What song did he choose to play? And knowing Stan, he probably just rambled a solo, which he was expert at accompanying people and always had a great solo to contribute. And after he passed away, we were very, very distraught. My wife Terry had been in a band with Stan. She sang backup with him, and Stan played many times with me. The first time I ever played in Staten Island, the show was called Lou Russo and Friends, and Stan was one of those friends who got up and played with me at the ETG. And he was always very gracious. He was not, never put himself on a pedestal, was always down to earth. And so we wanted to do something for him. So we started a petition, my wife and I, to get the street in front of Mandolin Brothers named for Stan J. And we went to the borough president's office, and we contacted, I think, David Hernandez and Debbie Rose, and I sent him a proposal. I sent him an illustration of the street. I thought about what's a clever name for the street. And Stan, although he was a folkie, he loved the Beatles, and he loved George Harrison. So I said, how about Stan J. Way, like Blue Jay Way? And I said, oh, that's it. That's perfect. And everyone at the borough president's office knew it was going to be Stan J. Way, Stan J. Way, Stan J. Way, Stan J. Way. So we had the big ceremony, the unveiling, and they put the sign up, and it had a cover on it. We had a big celebration of people waiting at the corner of Forest Avenue. And they unveiled the sign, and it says, Stanley J. Way. And Stan did not like particularly to be called Stan Lee. Stanley. Stan J. Way rhymes. Wordplay. Stan J. Way. Alliteration. No, they had to make a Stanley J. Way. So Allison said to me, when they go home, Lou, climb up the pole and with some green paint and white out the L-E-Y at the end. So it says Stan J. Way. And so now, ironic, I made a speech at that time. And I said, now Stan's store, Mandolin Brothers, is on Stan Street, Stan J. Way. And now, ironically, that the Mandolin Brothers was going out of business, Mandolin Brothers store is not on the street. The only thing that remains is the name of the street. And we're so glad that we got the street named for him. When we got the street named for him, by the way, Dan Master, a good friend and very good, close friends with Stan, he was our inside guy at the borough president's office, and he had a lot of clout, and he helped push that deal through. And happily, I can say now, it's been a couple of years after Stan has passed away, and I've been told by Allison and Eric that Mandolin Brothers, the name Mandolin Brothers, has been sold to a West Coast group, and they're going to keep Mandolin Brothers going, that name with the provenance of Stan J. and the reputation. And I've been contacted by those people actually to do ads and promotion for the new Mandolin Brothers. They're going to keep it as Mandolin Brothers. They're not going to put new in front of it. And so that's kind of gratifying. It was very sad to think that Mandolin Brothers would disappear, but it looks like, at least I'm told, that it will continue. And that's the story. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.